Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy here, also known as ETCG1 when posting videos to this channel. And here on this channel I start things off with, hey, if it's your birthday, happy birthday. Please enjoy this digital confection that I found for you on the internet. And this confection happens to be themed with today's video. Ooh. And the theme of today's video is how the water leak issue got solved. And a lot of you asked questions about this. You wanted to basically get some footage, find out how they were gonna fix this water issue that I've had since before I moved into this property. For those of you not familiar with the situation, well, I'll link videos down in the description to describe it in more detail, but the shorter answer is, we sold our old house to buy this house with this shop so that I can continue the work of Eric the Car Guy. Unfortunately, before I even moved in, I came here to do some work on the house and I found a water leak coming from the water main that was leaking under the driveway of all places, and well, that certainly put a damper on all of the hope that I had for this place coming into it. A lot of money later and it's fixed. A lot of money, and I should say a lot of labor by some very dedicated plumbers who I will name here, Gates Plumbing and Excavating, and they will be linked down in the description. But those guys worked very hard over 2.5 days to solve the water issue that I had at my house, and this is how they did it. Now, many of you had said to me, Eric, why would you want to put the water line back underneath the driveway? Why not dig along the side of the driveway and put the line there instead? Which honestly was a brilliant idea, a great idea. I had some pushback against that because part of this driveway is on the side of a hill, a rather steep hill, and my concern was that digging along the side of the driveway on the hillside would cause it to sort of undermine the integrity of that driveway, and over time that erosion might accelerate and, well, the whole driveway goes away. So I was super concerned about that. I conveyed those concerns to the plumbers and, well, they accommodated me. They dug on the other side of the driveway. So they dug a trench on the other side of the driveway, just about all the way down to the point where it turns and goes down to my house. Now the question is, how do you get, well, without digging up the driveway, how do you get from one side of the driveway to the other? And they did this, as I mentioned, without digging up the driveway. And the hero of this whole video, I think, is going to be this thing called the mole. And in addition to digging these ditches in order to lay the new water line into, this mole was the solution that they used in order to shoot under things like driveways. And they did, I think, a total of 5 of these shots. One at the house, from the house out into the field out in front of the house, which then goes over to the shop, and then they did another shot underneath the driveway of the shop, which I believe was their longest shot ever. Well, let's talk a little bit about the mole. Think of the mole as a jackhammer without the handle. So just the business end of a jackhammer, you know, those things that construction workers break up concrete and other bits with. It's a hammer. It's like, it's pneumatic. It's run by compressed air. But as I said, this mole is like a jackhammer, but it doesn't have all the other stuff attached to it. This was about a 4-foot long metal tube, 2 inches in diameter, this one. I believe there's other sizes that they have, but this one was a 2-inch in diameter mole and about 4 feet long and attached to an air hose. Now, the thing that limits its travel, the reason why that long shot was so impressive, is the air hose that attaches between the switch for the mole and the actual mole itself. So that amount of air hose is about as far as you can go, period. And we maxed it out more than once on 2 of the shots. They really maxed it out. So the mole is, well, it's blind, just like an actual mole. And once you set it up to go in a certain direction, it's going to continue to go in that direction unless it hits a rock or some other obstruction while it's under the ground. And you're pretty much blind this whole time while using this. But the mole can change direction, so it can go forwards, but if you twist the hose around, you can actually get it to come backwards. So if it encounters some kind of obstruction while it's under the ground, you can basically back it up out of the hole and have it come in the opposite direction. So the mole can operate going forwards and going backwards, but there's no ability to steer it in any direction. So you really have to set it correctly before you put that thing loose underground, because once you let it loose underground, it's underground. Now, one thing they did to keep track of the mole was they wrapped around a sensor on the back of it to sort of keep track of it, so they could like follow along with basically a metal detector is probably the best way I can put it, and they could tell how deep it was. Which how deep it was is also important, because in order to legally bury a water line here in Ohio, it has to be below the frost line, and the frost line in Ohio is set at 30 inches below the surface. And it, as far as the regulations are concerned, that water line needs to be 6 inches below that. So the total depth of the water line needed to be 36 inches below the surface in order to be below the frost line, so that it didn't freeze or have anything bad happen to it. So they had to keep this hole that they were digging with the mole at 36 inches or more. So that was also part of it. So its depth is also important. They had two, like I said, hero shots. One of them was from the house. The first shot that they did from the house out into the field was a miss. It came out a little too high and came out into some brickwork and some things that I had. But it was neat because, like I said, it's a jackhammer, so you get this little thumping action. So it's like dug, 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 as it goes under the ground, and as it gets closer to the surface. Or I sort of played this game to where I would stand on the ground to see if I could guess where it was underneath my feet. And you can feel it. You can feel the vibrations coming up through the ground from this mole, because, like I said, it's a jackhammer that's underground, and the closer it gets to the surface, well, the more exciting it becomes, because you've likely waited a long time for that to happen, because it does not move quickly. The shot that they did from the house, the first one they did, like I said, missed and went a little too high, but the second one was like a perfect 1 in a million shot. They dug a trench across the field by the shop out towards the house, and they dug a hole by the house, and they sent the mole from the house out into the field. And they managed to land the mole directly in the trench that they had dug. Like that feels like a 1 in a million shot, because not only was it the aiming of the mole, but it was also the excavator operator that was digging along the way. And those two things just happened to meet. So that was pretty cool. And that was the first shots. Like I said, missed the first time, but nailed it the second time. The second shot was their longest shot ever that they'd said, which was 53 feet underneath the driveway out in front of the shop. So rather than digging up the driveway and everything, bring out the mole. Well, the difficulty here with this one was getting the hose back through, because it's one thing to run the mole through and create the hole, but once you've done that, the next step is to attach the water line to it and pull the air hose and the mole and everything back through, or not necessarily attaching the air hose directly to the mole, but perhaps putting like a piece of wire or some kind of something that goes through the hole with the mole, so that that hole doesn't collapse when you go to insert whatever it is you're trying to insert, which in this case was going to be a 1-inch water line. So the water line that we ran was 1 inch in diameter. The stuff going into the house and the stuff coming out of the meter is 3/4. So I'd spoken earlier that I thought the whole line was 3/4. No, it sizes up to 1 inch along its run, and then reduces down to 3/4, both where it comes in and goes out at the house. And there was some difficulty pulling the line back through, or getting the mole to come back through underneath the driveway. So they did have to use that reverse function, and they used that to help pull the line through and get things to come in. But it's kind of interesting. It's sort of like sewing up the ground, and then you create like a hole with your needle, the mole, through it, and then you run your thread, which is the water line, through it after the fact. It's kind of interesting. But again, like I said, it's not necessarily accurate, and it can go awry, but if it works out, hey man, it works out, and it saves you from digging up all that pavement and all that other stuff. But I really think the hero of all this was George, the excavator operator. That guy, I've got to tell you, he had way more confidence than caution, but I can see why, because you can tell that he had pretty much lived in an excavator, or was born into an excavator or something like that. One of the most talented operators I've seen, and certainly was right for this job, in that he was able to dig a very narrow trench along the side of the driveway that didn't disturb a lot of the vegetation, that managed to get to the depth we needed to, that 36 inches, and around some very difficult things. There was a fiber optic line and things like that they worked around. They did another shot with the mole. They went underneath that stuff. So when they got to thing like a tangle of cables or something like that, or the gas line, they basically tried to shoot underneath it rather than trying to dig down to it. I think all told there was 5 shots total. The 2 difficult ones were the one from the house and the one that went under the driveway out in front of the shop. They also redid my meter pit, which since I had been turning the water on and off all the time, somebody had come up into the driveway and ran over the meter pit again, which smashed it and moved it and made it even more difficult for me to access this valve. That was kind of a pain in the butt to get to. Remember, it's 1,000 feet between my house and this place, so every time I wanted water in the past, I'd ride my e-bike up, turn the water on or off, and then ride back, and that's just how life was. I was happy to have the water, but it certainly was a pain to try to do all of that. But again, Gates Plumbing and Excavating hooked me up, and they worked tirelessly for 2.5 days in order to get this done. Which leads me back to the conclusion that I was correct in not trying to do this myself. I'm not an operator. I haven't had the kind of experience that George had with that excavator, and he was an artist, a true artist with that thing. And all the guys worked hard, and you know what? For example, I also had a roof put on the house just before we moved in. And I've been finding roofing nails everywhere since. And it's not the first roof that I've had installed. And that same thing happened with that last roof, and finding roofing nails and everything everywhere after you've had a roof installed is probably going to be normal. I don't think there's any way to get them all because there's literally thousands of nails and everything that you're using. Some of them fall off, they get into gutters, they get washed out, they get blown out by the wind. They show up later down the road because they do go around and try to clean up after the fact. But that's the key. In addition to those roofing nails and things, the roofers also left like cigarette butts, like little bits of trash everywhere and everything like that. These plumbers did none of that, no. They even actually hauled away a bunch of trash that I had taken out of this shop and taken out of the house and everything else. So a lot of good things to say about them. So if you need them, they'll be linked down in the description along with additional stuff. But that is the story of how this got solved, how this whole water issue here got solved. And now that it is solved, I have some water, which means it's going to be easier to paint the inside of this shop. And I was kind of waiting until the water situation was resolved just for that reason. Because when you're painting, it's kind of nice to have water to clean up your brushes and your tools and things like that when you're done. Now I have that, so now I have no excuse to leave all this stuff sitting here. I've got to basically start moving forward on getting this place painted and start making some repair videos for you aside from me just talking to the camera like I am now. But it's been fun, right? I hope you enjoyed whatever time I took up for you during the course of this video, and you learned some new things about plumbing and excavating and all that kind of stuff. Well, basically how the water issue got solved here, which was kind of epic. I'm happy to share that with you. Again, there will be stuff linked in the description in addition to that, but there's also going to be a link to ericthecarguy.com down there, which is where I ask you to go if you have any automotive questions. Outside of that, I want to thank you so much for watching today. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty, and I will see you next time.